The husband discovered his wife with the pet, and the scene left him astonished. Helena spent hours locked in the room with her dog, alone, whenever her husband left. It was a repetitive ritual. The door closed, the footsteps moved away, and silence took over. Initially, no one suspected anything, but the insistence with which she isolated herself with the dog was undeniable. The animal never left, slept at her feet, followed her every step as if it were keeping a secret. This story will make you question everything you believe about animal instinct and will force you to see dogs from a new perspective. Álvaro arrived early that day, a rare occurrence. Work at the company had been interrupted by a breakdown, and he returned without telling Helena. He wanted to surprise her, but he was the one who was surprised. When he opened the door, the scene paralyzed him. Helena was lying on her side, motionless, with her blouse raised to her ribs, and on top of her, her golden retriever, Testa, bent over, slowly licking her exposed belly, repeatedly, in silence. Álvaro was speechless. The dimness of the room, lit only by the faint light from the window, amplified the wet and persistent sound of the dog's tongue and his own panting breath, for no apparent reason. Upon noticing his presence, Helena calmly turned her face away, didn't get scared, didn't try to explain, just pulled her blouse down and said in a low voice that she was resting, that she did that often, that it was normal, but nothing seemed normal. Álvaro stepped back, didn't answer, closed the door. Slowly, not knowing what to think, just turned around and left. From then on, everything seemed strange, but no one knew why. In the following days, Álvaro tried to ignore what he had seen, convinced himself that it was an exaggeration, tiredness, a mistaken interpretation, but the image returned at night during breaks in thought, in the shower, at work, a memory that insisted on manifesting itself, full of questions, and Testa maintained the same behavior. Helena had always been very attached to the dog since they adopted him 2 years before. He had become almost an extension of her. He slept at her feet, followed her around the house, waited outside the bathroom while she took a shower, but now he seemed different. There was something in the way he watched her, something more intense, more fixed. He never left her side, not even for a moment. If she lay down on the sofa, Testa was leaning against her. If she went to the kitchen, he positioned himself in front, like a protective barrier. If she got up at night, Testa woke up with her even when he was fast asleep. Álvaro began to notice, and the more he noticed, the more it seemed exaggerated. That night, while they were having dinner, Álvaro casually commented that the dog was very clingy. He tried to seem playful, but Helena, without looking up from her plate, replied that Testa had been needier lately, that he had always been clingy, that perhaps he was feeling the changes in the weather, in his mood, or even in the atmosphere of the house. But Álvaro did not answer, because he had noticed something else. Testa did not eat properly when Helena was not around, and the strangest thing was, he only approached Álvaro when Helena was present. When they were alone, the dog kept his distance, as if he was evaluating or suspicious of his every step. One morning, Álvaro woke up early, left the room silently, and, as he walked down the hallway, he saw the door to the office ajar. Testa was inside, lying next to the armchair where Helena used to read. She was still asleep, but the dog, even when she was gone, remained there in the place where she used to be. His head raised, his gaze distant. He was not sleeping, he was waiting. As the days went by, small gestures began to take on excessive meaning for Álvaro. Once he entered the room and found Testa sitting in front of Helena, staring at her as if he were waiting for a reaction. She was reading a book absent-mindedly, and from time to time, she would pet the dog, but she wouldn't look at him directly. It was as if a silent pact existed between the two of them, a pact that excluded Álvaro. In an attempt to break the growing tension, without explanation, he suggested a weekend trip to a place outside the city, just the two of them. But Helena hesitated, said she didn't want to leave Testa alone, that he wasn't well without her, that the last time they traveled, the dog got sick, didn't eat, vomited all night. Álvaro insisted, said they could leave him with his sister, who always took good care of him. But Helena shook her head firmly as if she wasn't negotiating that point, and concluded that if she were to leave, Testa would go with her, and the conversation ended there. That same night, when Álvaro came back from his shower, he found Testa lying on the bed in the place where he usually slept. Helena was already covered, watching something on her laptop. as if it were the most natural thing in the world. When he pointed to the dog, expecting her to take him away, she just said that she had colic and that Testa always comforted her on those days, that he knew when she needed it. The word echoed in Álvaro's mind. He knew. What do you mean? He knew. He didn't answer. He lay down on the other side without touching. The dog remained there between the two of them, his body glued to Helena's, his head close to her belly, as if there was no other place in the world where he should be. Álvaro stayed there, with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling. And that morning he woke up to a soft noise, turned slowly and saw Testa, once again, licking Helena's lifted blouse, right in the same spot as before, her skin exposed, her breathing calm, the dog acting delicately, as if he knew exactly where to touch. The next morning Álvaro left home earlier than usual, with a bitter taste in his throat that the coffee couldn't disguise. He felt like a stranger in his own house, an intruder in his own bed. Helena's silence, Testa's dedicated behavior, everything seemed like a code that he couldn't decipher, and it consumed him inside, like an invisible weight that wouldn't let go of his chest. At work, he spent the day distracted, forgot meetings, made mistakes in simple calculations, forgot where he left his cell phone. The image of Testa with his nose pressed against Helena's skin haunted him like a waking nightmare. What was he doing there? Was it really just a dog's game? Or was there something more? Something that no one dared to name? Álvaro no longer knew where the discomfort began, whether it was the dog's fixed eyes or his wife's passivity. He only knew that there was something deeply wrong. He felt it in the way Testa ignored him, even when he came home and called him by name. He felt it in the way Helena had become an almost absent presence, always accompanied by that golden shadow that seemed more human than animal. He felt it especially at night, when the three of them shared the same room. But he was the only one who slept away from any contact. It was as if he had been replaced. At first, he tried to deny what he felt, tried to convince himself that he was exaggerating. He was just a dog, after all, an affectionate, devoted, clingy animal. It was normal. Everyone said so, but inside the house, normal no longer seemed so natural. Testa was not only close, he was exclusive. Helena was his. All her movements revolved around the dog, and all the dog's movements revolved around her. Álvaro began to notice the little details. He noticed that Testa no longer reacted to his arrivals as before. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't run to the door. He stayed close to Helena, watching, as if deciding whether or not it was worth getting up when Álvaro walked by. The dog's gaze followed him like a beacon of surveillance, a fixed, direct gaze that didn't seem to come from an animal, but from something conscious, something that judged. This invisible tension grew, and the more it grew, the more the atmosphere in the house changed. Helena didn't seem to notice anything, or perhaps she did and pretended not to see. She continued to treat Testa as always, covering him with affection, letting him climb onto the bed, lie on her lap, follow her to the bathroom. Testa followed her like a living shadow, and Álvaro, even there, already felt like an intruder. It was suffocating. Deep down, he knew that the situation was not sustainable, but he still hesitated. He felt that any interference would be seen as selfishness, unfounded jealousy, and that paralyzed him. No one had ever prepared him to compete for emotional space with an animal. He didn't know how to act, what to say, how to justify the growing discomfort that was taking over him. The house was no longer the house, it was a stage for three presences: a woman, a dog, and a man who was left over. One morning, when he left the room, he found Testa sitting in the hallway, as if he had spent the whole night there, standing guard. The dog's eyes were not sleepy. They were alert, active, focused. Álvaro passed by him and felt that same shiver, the kind of sensation that precedes a decision, and in that moment, something inside him defined itself. He had reached his limit. He could no longer pretend not to see what was happening. He could no longer tolerate the strangeness as if it were routine. He needed to break it. He needed to test it. He needed, somehow, to cut that invisible cord that linked Helena to the dog with a strength he couldn't understand. That same night, while they ate dinner in silence, Álvaro communicated his decision. He said directly that the situation with Testa had gone too far, that it was no longer a simple case of affection or attachment, that the dog was becoming obsessive, invasive, And more than that, there was a specific behavior that he could no longer accept. He said that the dog licked the same part of Helena's body insistently, always the same place, always in the same pattern, and that he could no longer see that as something harmless. He said that it wasn't natural, that there was something wrong, that it had to stop. Helena's reaction was immediate. Her expression changed in the blink of an eye. Her previously neutral look became hard. Her hand gripped the fork tightly and her voice rose full of accusation. She said that it was absurd, that Álvaro was jealous of an animal, that it was impossible for him to be so paranoid as to invent problems where there were none. She said that Testa was just a sensitive dog, and that he showed affection because he felt true affection, the kind of affection that she, by the way, had not been receiving from her own husband. She called it unhealthy jealousy, said that he was ridiculing himself, that he was trying to create a war between her and the dog, because deep down he could not accept the fact that Testa was part of her, that he had always been, that since he entered that house he was family. But Álvaro did not back down. With a voice as firm as ever, he said that he could not take it anymore, that it had crossed all limits, that it was too strange, too uncomfortable, and that, yes, there was something there that he could not ignore. It was not just a dog licking his arm or his face, it was always the same spot on her body, always on her belly, and he observed, always staring, always attentive, always in between the two of them. He said it was suffocating and added that he could no longer accept that uncontrolled coexistence, that Testa needed limits, that it had to end. It was either him or insanity. The next day, he prepared the back room, a space that had previously served as an office, now adapted with what Testa needed. A clean bed, toys spread out, the water and food bowls properly organized. He didn't want it to seem like a punishment. It was just a necessary separation, a break. He took the dog there in a calm voice, trying to show affection. Testa couldn't resist, but he didn't seem receptive either. He entered the room, looked around, sniffed the floor, and then sat down near the door, as if he understood perfectly what was happening, as if he didn't accept it, but decided not to react for now. From that moment on, the rooms in the house began to have invisible limits. Doors were kept closed. Testa's circulation was limited to walking and feeding times. Álvaro took him out every day without fail, and still took care of the animal's hygiene and well-being. But he kept his distance, prevented reunions with Helena, created barriers. In the first few days, there was a small sense of relief. The air seemed less tense. Meals were more peaceful. Helena was present for longer, went back to doing small household chores, as if she were coming out of a long trance. Álvaro, for the first time in a long time, sat next to his wife on the sofa, even if in silence, even if the weight of estrangement still hung between them. It was little, but it was something. But Testa did not react in the same way. At first, he tried to get around the rules. He sat in front of the door and cried softly. Sometimes he scratched the wood with increasing force, as if he wanted to dig a way out. Other times, he just stood there, motionless, with a lost gaze, as if he were waiting for someone specific, to open the door. Álvaro pretended not to hear. He put on music, left the television on, anything that would muffle the sounds coming from the back of the house. Helena, however, heard, and even if she didn't say anything, her look betrayed it. There was sadness in her gestures, slower movements, a constant, almost imperceptible sigh. She missed him. Álvaro knew this, but he continued. He believed it was the right thing to do. He believed that this separation, if endured for a few days, would bring balance. He was wrong. After a week, Testa's behavior began to change subtly. At first, he no longer cried. He no longer scratched. He just lay down for hours, in the same corner, without reacting to stimuli, without showing any interest in toys or food. His food bowl would be full in the morning. His water would remain for long periods. Even walks became silent. The dog walked slowly, with his head down, as if he were being dragged inside. Álvaro tried to convince him with treats, with an animated voice, with long walks, but nothing worked. Testa only obeyed without enthusiasm, without energy. The dog that before seemed to be a living extension of the house now became a tired figure, a present but distant body. Something in him was fading, and Álvaro, even without admitting it, began to feel guilty. The worst was when he realized that the dog spent most of the night awake. The first time he noticed it was when he got up in the early hours of the morning to drink water. As he passed through the hallway, he heard a soft sound, almost a sigh coming from the back room. He opened the door slowly and found Testa sitting, motionless, staring at the wall. The animal's gaze was strange, dull, unresponsive. There was no sign of sleep, just an empty presence, as if he were there only out of obligation, as if his soul had remained somewhere else, a place from which he had been torn. The next morning, the situation worsened. Álvaro put food in the bowl and left for work. When he returned, he found everything exactly as he had left it. The food untouched, the water full. Testa was lying on his side, breathing slowly and irregularly. When he tried to call him, the dog didn't even get up. He moved his tail once, weakly, and then stopped. The alarm went off inside Álvaro, a silent but deafening alarm. He knew that this wasn't just sadness. It wasn't a tantrum. There was something deeply wrong. Regret hit him like a sledgehammer. Maybe he had waited too long. Maybe he had forced an abrupt cut. Maybe what he considered common sense had caused deeper damage than he imagined. Without wasting time, he picked the dog up in his arms and carried him to the car. Testa didn't resist. He was too light, too limp. His head lolled to the side, his eyes half open. Every minute of the journey to the clinic seemed too long. And inside the car, for the first time, Álvaro realized that he was afraid of losing that animal that, even in its strangeness, was part of his life more than he would like to admit. The car drove through the streets as if each traffic light were an unbearable barrier. Álvaro couldn't think of anything else but Testa's limp body in the passenger seat. Each short breath, each tremor of his paws, each weak moan created a new knot in his stomach. He had never allowed himself to create a strong bond with that dog, perhaps out of pride, perhaps out of jealousy. But now there, with Testa on the verge of a breakdown, he realized that it was no longer a question of liking or not. It was a question of life. He arrived at the clinic and was seen quickly. The animal's condition demanded priority. An assistant ran to pick up Testa in her arms and take him to the observation area. Álvaro had to fill out some information, but his hand was shaking so much that the pen almost fell. The girl at the reception noticed, but didn't say anything. She just took the clipboard back and said that the vet would come to talk to him soon. The waiting time seemed like torture. Sitting on those hard plastic chairs, he felt as if everything inside him was falling apart. The image of Testa standing in the hallway days before came back. To his mind, those fixed eyes, that posture, that silent resistance that he interpreted as stubbornness. Now everything made sense, in a much more painful way. The vet came in a few minutes later, a man with a tired but kind expression. He was wearing a lab coat stained with hair and carrying a clipboard folded under his arm. He called Álvaro to a smaller, more private room. Inside, he asked him to tell him everything from the beginning. He didn't just want the physical symptoms, he wanted the context. Álvaro spoke without hiding anything. He told him about Testa's obsessive behavior with his wife, the constant vigilance, the fact that he slept glued to her, the refusal to move away even for a moment. And then, more seriously, he told him about his insistent habit of licking Helena's belly, always the same place, always with that methodical calm, and how it made him uncomfortable, how it had been growing until it became intolerable. The vet listened attentively, didn't ask questions, just nodded slowly in agreement, like someone who already knew similar stories well. When Álvaro finished, he waited for some comment to ease the tension, some laugh saying that it was an exaggeration, that it was paranoia, but none of that happened. The doctor's expression became even more serious. He said that dogs have senses that humans would never fully understand. He spoke of smell, of fine perception, of reading almost invisible signs. He said that he had already read studies and seen cases in which dogs reacted to chemical changes in their owners' bodies, that they licked wounds that hadn't even appeared on their skin, even though they knew, even before the exams, what was about to happen. He said that in some situations, dogs had detected diseases in the early stages just by changes in the body's natural smell, a smell imperceptible to any human, but not to them. He also said that obsessive behavior was not common, but when it happened, it usually had a reason, and that, maybe, just maybe, Testa was trying to show something. At that moment, Álvaro felt the words sink in as if they were piercing his skin. There was no longer any way to hide behind distrust. Everything he had denied now made sense. in a brutal way. The discomfort, the uneasiness, the jealousy. Perhaps it had all been a muffled cry, a real warning of something that was not just about a clingy dog, but about an instinct too sharp to be ignored. The vet suggested that his wife go to the doctor, that she get tests done, that she start with the area where the dog usually licked. He said it was a precautionary measure, perhaps not. If it had been just a suspicion, an early diagnosis would change everything. But reality hit Álvaro with the force of an earthquake as he left the clinic. Anguish consumed him. Tay would be hospitalized for safety, hydrated, monitored. He was debilitated, weak, emotionally destroyed. The confirmation of the disease crushed him. Álvaro took one last look at the dog, almost without strength, and left carrying an immeasurable weight, a guilt greater than any burden he had ever felt. On the way home, he was overwhelmed by anguish. How would he tell Helena? How would he describe the diagnosis without sounding like a madman? How could he convince her to do tests without the conversation turning into a battle? Urgency pressed him, but after everything they had been through, words would be harder than ever. However, his intuition screamed that time was his enemy, and perhaps Tay had known this all along. At home, Helena was sitting on the sofa in front of the switched-off television, her face tired, her shoulders hunched, enveloped in a dense silence, an atmosphere that paralyzed him. Álvaro simply left the keys on the counter and took a deep breath. He told her everything, word for word. Tay's hospitalization, his extreme weakness, the medical care, the conversation with the vet, every detail, every suggestion. Helena listened in silence, her gaze fixed on the dark screen, absorbing the impact of the news without reacting, without arguing, just the weight of the truth, a deep silence that indicated an internal struggle. The next day, before even thinking about doctors, Helena went to see Tay. She needed this. She couldn't imagine the dog suffering without being by his side. She went alone. She didn't wait for Álvaro, longing for a moment just for them. In the clinic, the smell of disinfectant and the anxiety of the environment mixed with other animals' voices and the noise of equipment, but nothing mattered when she saw Tay. Her heart raced as she approached the stall where he was. The dog, weak, with lifeless eyes, changed when he felt her presence. It was as if a spark of life revived him. His tail moved, his nose raised, his eyes shone. He tried to stand up without strength, as if he needed to be standing for her. The meeting was silent, full of meaning. Helena knelt down, put her hand between the bars, felt Tay's nose on her skin. It was as if they were both breathing again after days without oxygen. The tears came, not from drama, but from relief, from guilt, from everything that had been left unsaid. The vet showed up, surprised by Tay's reaction, something he'd never seen before. It was impressive, an emotional response, a positive sign. He said that Tay was getting better, that he would need vitamins, and that if he made progress, he could go home in the afternoon. Helena thanked him, her voice choked, petting the dog who was looking at her as if asking to never be abandoned again. She stayed there for more than half an hour, time wasted without rushing, just her and Tay, restoring bonds that had never really been broken. Before leaving, she insisted on talking to the vet. She needed to hear for herself everything that sounded like an exaggeration in her mind. The vet confirmed everything with the same seriousness. Dogs have sharp senses. They perceive biological changes in humans. Their sense of smell identifies subtle chemical changes associated with diseases. It could be a coincidence, a repetitive caress, but Tay's behavior was too insistent to be random. Investigation was necessary, not with panic, but with responsibility. Helena listened, her heart racing, not knowing if it was fear, disbelief, or distrust. But she knew she could no longer ignore the signs. She left in silence, her chest full of uneasiness. Something inside her had changed. The way home was silent, just her and her thoughts. The image of Tay coming to life upon seeing her was vivid. His reaction, as if waking from a deep sleep, disturbed her. The vet's words echoed. A dog noticing something in the human body even before symptoms appeared seemed absurd, but not impossible. Tay always reacted to her mood, her pain, her silences. And now, what seemed like an exaggeration in Álvaro's words made terrible sense. She didn't say anything to her husband, took a shower, looked at her cell phone pretending to look for something, but she was processing everything. The next day, after picking Tay up at the clinic, Helena made the decision. She got up early, got dressed, and went to a health center. She asked for a checkup, saying she was tired and had cramps, without mentioning the dog, without being able to explain. She underwent tests. In the following days, she went to several doctors, basic consultations, investigating the area where Tay licked. The doctor sensed something and asked questions about her symptoms. Helena reported mild pain, thinking it was normal. Tests were ordered. Ultrasound, blood tests, simple things, probably nothing, but it was better to check. The wait was agonizing. Time dragged on. She tried to maintain her routine, but she couldn't relax. Tay at home wouldn't leave her alone. He slept at the foot of the bed in the bathroom while she took a shower. He followed her every step, as if he were fulfilling a mission. Every time she sat on the couch or in bed, he would touch his nose to the same spot on her belly, licking insistently, always with the same care, the same look. The first tests came back clean, everything normal, but Helena felt that it wasn't enough. Something was weighing on her. Tay's insistent gaze confirmed it. She asked for more tests. She wanted to investigate in depth. The doctor, seeing the fear in her eyes, referred her to a specialized clinic. New tests, more waiting. It was no longer doubt. It was search. Tay went into alert mode. He didn't move away. He waited at the bathroom door. In front of the bedroom, he went to the kitchen, ignoring any distraction, as if she was the only one. His behavior was more than attachment. It was a mission, a constant vigil, a warning that was not yet fully understood. One Friday morning, the call from the office. A test showed something. The doctor wanted to see her immediately. Helena tried to remain calm, but a chill invaded her stomach. Her body already knew. She left slowly. Tay looking at her, as if asking her to come back soon, as if he knew what it was about. The walk to the office was long. The elevator slow, the lights dim, everything conspiring to increase the weight on her chest. At the reception, the receptionist's kind smile sounded artificial. Helena confirmed her name, signed the form, and sat down. Minutes seemed like hours, her eyes fixed on old magazines, her mind miles away. When they called her, she felt her legs waver. She took a deep breath and went in. The doctor sitting behind the desk had a serious but calm face, not indicating panic, but not the tranquility of receiving good news either. She said that the tests were fine, blood pressure, heart, and blood counts were normal, but one result caught her attention. An imaging test showed a discrete, almost invisible change that could be ignored, but it was there, a small dot, a sign that could be nothing, or the beginning of something. She didn't want to alarm her, but she couldn't ignore it. Helena listened, her gaze lost. The words as if they were coming from underwater, a distant sound. She tried to reason, but all she could imagine was Tay, his snout pressed against her belly. The same insistence. She thanked him, received the referral, left more slowly, without crying, without running, just going down the stairs, carrying a weight without a name, but with a shape. At home, Tay was in the same place. He got up, ran to her, smelled her legs, put his nose on her belly and watched. More than a gesture, a silent confirmation, a reminder of the time that was passing. Álvaro noticed the change in his wife, something beyond tiredness, an expression of contained fear. He approached slowly, asked how the appointment went, carefully, but the anxiety was evident. Helena took her time, took a deep breath, looked at the floor and said that the doctor had seen something, a strange spot, a sign that shouldn't be there. No one was sure, but they would need to investigate it thoroughly. A biopsy. It could be something simple, but they couldn't risk it. Álvaro listened in silence, his jaw tense, his eyes on her. When she finished, he sat down next to her, his hand lightly on her back, telling her that she wasn't alone, that they would face it together. The important thing was to act quickly. Tay remained there, his nose turned towards Helena, the three of them connected by something beyond fear or love, a silent certainty that something was about to change forever. The weekend passed in silence, not the silence of a lack of words, but of an excess of thoughts. Helena slept little, her body heavy and her eyes moist. Álvaro did his best to comfort her, but waiting was the worst medicine. The exam was scheduled for Monday, the day they both feared and longed for. Tay seemed to know everything beforehand, glued to Helena, sleeping close by, his head resting on her body, watching them attentively, monitoring the atmosphere in the house. He was no longer a pet, a living sign of a bond beyond logic. On the morning of the appointment, Álvaro insisted on going with her. Helena agreed. She didn't have the strength to refuse and didn't want to face it alone. The drive was silent, the traffic slow. Each red light seemed to last longer. The silence in the car sacred. Everything had already been thought of. They were received by the same doctor, calm and firm. In the private room, the images from the exam were on the table. The doctor was straightforward. There was a small ovarian tumor at an early stage, a blessing, a type of cancer with a high healing rate when discovered in time, which was the case. He looked at Helena firmly and compassionately, explaining surgery, scheduled as soon as possible. The chances of recovery were very high, 99%, but delicate. Helena did not react. She looked down, as if she wanted to hide from the word cancer, even at an early stage. Even with high chances of healing weighed more than any statistics. Álvaro felt the world spin, the unstable floor. I wanted to talk, but I didn't find words. I wanted to share the pain, but she was just hers. They embraced a silent cry, short breaths and contained tears. The doctor respected the moment. In the car with the engine off, Álvaro spoke, sorry for separating Helena from Tay. The dog was no obstacle, but a warning, an angel, a four-legged hero. He apologized, feeling guilty of doubting, for finding an exaggeration what was a sign of love. Helena didn't respond with words, just leaned her head on her shoulder. At home, Tay received them with a calm look, as knowing that they understood, without having to warn you anymore. The news did not transform Helena overnight. It was a mist that was installed, in thoughts, habits, the way of looking at the world. Everything was different, but at the same time, everything was still in the same place. That was what hurt the most. The life outside would not stop. In the following days, preparations began for surgery. Acting fast was the best chance. Preoperative examinations, X-ray, electrocardiogram, blood tests. Helena remained firm, strong in the eyes of others, calm, speaking little, but did not collapse. Acting. Inside, I felt a stretched rope, ready to break. Álvaro accompanied her in everything. Canceled meetings, commitments, present in each appointment, examination. Her silence was presence, a quiet love, not trying to comfort the strength, just putting himself there, firm. The one felt every change, calmer now as if he had fulfilled his mission to warn, did not lick with insistence, just lying close, watching, sleeping at the feet of the bed, sometimes laying his head on his lap. The mood of the house changed, even the smell seemed different. Álvaro noticed that the days were slower but precious. Every gesture, word, look, gained weight, as if suddenly they understood that one cannot live waiting, that life happens now, even when difficult. Helena got a small bag to the hospital, comfortable clothes, toiletries, an unfinished book, all slowly, bending carefully, as organizing the pieces was a way of not thinking about what was to come. The night before the hospitalization, the house became quieter. Had dinner together at the side, attentive. Helena did not want television, no music, went to the room, lay, looking at the ceiling. Álvaro lay down next door without forcing conversation, setting the sheet, running his hand on his hair so she knew he was there. There were no more fights, no hurts, just shared fear, and the force that was born of it. The next morning they got up early. Helena just dressed, arrested her hair, and said she was ready. Since, as if he felt the importance of the moment, he was agitated, walking around the house, and sat at the door, as preventing the exit. Helena crouched down, ran her hand on her muzzle, said she would come back soon, that she needed to go, but would come back. He leaned his muzzle in his hand, looked at Álvaro, handing her the mission of taking care, protecting, being for her when he could not. Álvaro understood. The way to the hospital was silent. There was no doubt, only the weight of reality. In the back seat, Helena watched the outside world through the glass, her eyes fixed, almost motionless, only a slow blink revealing an attempt to record the scene in her memory, a precious moment of well-being that she needed to keep, before fear, anguish, and inner torment consumed her completely. Álvaro drove with extreme caution, his hands firm on the steering wheel, but inside he was ravaged by a storm of memories and apprehensions, driven by a desperate need to be strong for her, to not give in. Not now. The hospital was already busy despite the early morning. The admissions ward, of course, with white walls and large windows, welcomed them. They signed the papers, and within minutes, Helena was headed to her room, a small but clean and quiet space. The bed was made, the sheets were impeccable, the closet was empty. and a solitary armchair was in the corner. Álvaro remained by her side, following her every step, holding her bag, trying to create a semblance of normality in the face of the impending chaos. Helena lay down, adjusted her pillow, and her eyes met the ceiling. Silence hung between them for a while until, in a low voice, she confessed the fear that was taking over her. There was no screaming, no shaking, just the simple admission of fear of the unknown, of pain, of an uncertain future. Álvaro sat down beside her, firmly intertwined his fingers with hers, and told her that it was natural to feel fear, that he was terrified too, but that she was not alone, that everything had a purpose, that Tay had been the omen, the warning, the almost imperceptible miracle that they had barely understood. A faint smile appeared on her lips, and, for the first time since her diagnosis, Álvaro saw in her eyes not only fear, but a spark of acceptance, as if she had finally found confidence in the future. A short time later, nurses arrived to prepare her, checking her blood pressure, administering a light medication, putting on the identification bracelet. Álvaro left for a moment to make room for the preparations, and when he returned, she was already ready, lying down, waiting. There was nothing left to do but wait. They exchanged one last look before parting, a silent, intense look, full of meaning. I am here, and I will continue to be here. Then she was led through the hospital corridors, while Álvaro followed her with his gaze, until she disappeared behind the double doors of the operating room. Time stood still. He returned to the lobby, sat in an uncomfortable armchair, surrounded by people with lost looks. A television in the corner of the room remained ignored. The air was thick, the silence heavy, punctuated by murmurs. Álvaro spent hours there, his eyes fixed on the door of the operating room. He didn't know how long it would take. The doctor had said it was a delicate procedure, but it wouldn't take long. But the clock seemed to have stopped. He thought about everything they had experienced. Arguments, silences, moments when he had almost given up trying to understand Helena. He thought about Tay, about how he had carried the warning alone that no one had heard, about how he had almost pushed him away forever, when in fact, he was the key to everything. The guilt echoed, the image of the dog locked in the back room, eyes dull, body weakened, haunted him. How could everything have been different if he had listened sooner, if he had realized sooner? But now there was no room for regrets, only the present, and the present required presence. It was a little over 3 hours of waiting that seemed like an eternity, each minute stretching. Each person who entered made him raise his hopes, until finally, the door opened with a dry click, and the doctor appeared with the serenity that now represented everything he needed to hear. She approached, sat down next to him, and announced the end. The surgery had been successful without complications. The tumor had been safely removed. The tests indicated that there was no metastasis, and because it had been discovered early, the risk was minimal. Helena was waking up from the anesthesia. Álvaro couldn't answer right away. He felt an intense heat rise from his chest to his face. Relief hit him like a powerful wave, lifting the weight he was carrying. He lowered his head, clasped his hands between his knees, and took a deep breath as if he were emerging from deep water. A little later, he was called to the room. Helena was lying down, drowsy, her eyes half open, her face pale, but there she was, whole, present, alive. He approached her silently, held her hand, and felt her cold skin. She recognized him with a light, tired but serene look. The fear was no longer there. There was something new, perhaps hope. They remained there for long minutes, he sitting in the chair, she regaining her strength, the machines beeping from time to time, but without disturbing him. Life went on, slowly but surely. When the anesthesia wore off, Helena spoke softly, remembering the doctor's words, saying that she knew the cancer had been removed, that now was the time to continue with the treatment, care, and tests, but that the worst, the initial impact, had passed. Álvaro listened attentively, and at the end, unable to contain himself any longer, he said what had been bothering him since the beginning. He was sorry. He had made a mistake in pushing Tay away. He had let his pride and discomfort speak louder than his common sense. He had failed to see the obvious, and in the end, the dog had saved her life. Helena simply squeezed his hand. She didn't need anything else. The truth was there. They both knew it. Helena spent 2 more days in the hospital, the time needed for post-operative care, to control the pain, To ensure her recovery, Álvaro remained by her side, sleeping in the hard armchair, helping with meals, adjusting the pillows. His presence was now firm, dedicated, silent, like someone who understood that it took a while for him to truly be there, but that he would never leave. The initial recovery was positive. The tests showed stability, the vital signs were regular, the doctors spoke optimistically, and this brought some color back to Helena's face. Even though she was weak, even in pain, she seemed more alive, as if there was now something to lean on. On the third day, she was discharged. They returned home in silence, but it was a different silence. Now there was something soft in the air, a relief wrapped in tiredness. Álvaro helped Helena climb the stairs carefully, holding her hand, watching her every move. She walked slowly but firmly. She was in pain, but she was determined. When they opened the apartment door, the first thing they saw was Tay. He ran through the house as if he had been waiting for this moment all his life. In seconds, he was in front of Helena, jumping with joy, making sounds that were a mix of restrained barks and happy cries. His tail thumping loudly on the floor, his eyes shining, his body trembling with emotion. Álvaro had to restrain him, stopping him from jumping on her, afraid of damaging his stitches. But Tay didn't stop. He circled around them, sniffed Helena's legs, twirled around as if he didn't know where to go first, unable to contain his joy. Helena, even though she was tired, laughed for the first time in many days. She laughed with her whole body. There was a light in her eyes that hadn't been seen for weeks. She sat down slowly on the sofa, with her husband's help, and waited for Tay to approach her calmly. The dog walked over to her slowly, as if he finally understood that he needed to be gentle. He carefully climbed onto the rug, put his nose on her belly, took a deep breath as if he were sniffing to make sure, and then, as if something inside him was telling him that everything was resolved, he settled down next to her, laid his head on her lap with a long, deep sigh and slept. Slept like never before, without vigilance, without alertness, without tension. A peaceful, heavy, almost childlike sleep, as if his entire body was saying, "Now everything is okay. Now I can rest." Helena ran her fingers through the soft fur on her head, looking silently at Álvaro. They didn't need to exchange words, they both understood. Tay knew, he always knew, and now he could finally stop warning her. What do you think? Do you believe that animals are capable of seeing beyond what our eyes can see? Leave your opinion in the comments. Oh, and also share if you have a pet. What is its name?